Over 10,000. Just let that number sink in for a moment. It's not just a statistic you read in a history book. It represents more than 10,000 children in 46 different countries, born into a world that had promised their mothers safety, but instead delivered a catastrophe. This, right here, is the immense human cost of what is arguably the single greatest and most tragic medical disaster of the modern era. So today, we are going to tell the story of thalidomide, a story about a pill that was marketed as a completely harmless, simple cure for morning sickness, but instead, it would go on to shatter lives, break the public's trust, and force us as a society to completely rewrite the rules of medical safety forever. In this deep dive explainer, we're going to uncover exactly how this tragedy unfolded. We'll walk through 6 distinct chapters of this story. We'll start with the molecule's fatal, hidden flaw. Then we'll look at the poisonous marketing lie that sold it to the world. We'll follow the doctors who became detectives to solve the mystery, and celebrate the one woman who said no. Then we'll dig into the drug's biological attack on new life, and finally explore the new rules of safety that rose from the ashes. Okay, so our story begins where all the damage really started, at a level that's completely invisible to the naked eye. You see, the entire catastrophe wasn't just a mistake in marketing or testing, though it was that too. It was rooted in a fundamental and, at the time, fatally misunderstood property of the thalidomide molecule itself. The whole problem begins with a scientific concept called chirality. Now, that sounds pretty complex, I know, but it's actually as simple as looking at your own 2 hands. Go ahead, try it. They're perfect mirror images of each other, right? But you can't lay one perfectly on top of the other. Your thumbs will always be pointing in opposite directions. They're non-superimposable. Well, it turns out that molecules can have this exact same handedness, existing in 2 distinct mirror image forms. And this is where we find the hidden dagger in thalidomide. It was being manufactured and sold as a mixture of 2 of these mirror image molecules, which scientists call enantiomers. The right-handed molecule, the R enantiomer, was fantastic. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. It was a safe, effective sedative. But its perfect mirror image, the left-handed molecule, or S enantiomer, was a potent teratogen, a substance that causes absolutely devastating birth defects. The company was literally selling a bottle that contained both a cure and a poison, all mixed together. So, the obvious question is, why not just separate them, right? Why not just sell this safe, right-handed version and get rid of the dangerous one? Well, because of a fatal flaw that wasn't in the drug's manufacturing, but in our own biology. You see, once inside the human body, a process called in vivo racemization kicks in. The body's own chemistry rapidly flips the safe, right-handed molecule into the dangerous left-handed one. It meant that creating a pure, totally safe version of thalidomide was biologically impossible. The poison was inescapable. So, you have this hidden chemical danger baked into the molecule itself. How on earth did that become a global catastrophe? How did a molecule with such a fatal, built-in flaw end up in the medicine cabinets of expectant mothers all over the world? Well, the answer lies in a shocking campaign of aggressive marketing and, frankly, deliberate deceit. To really get the picture, you have to understand the company that made it. Kimi Grunenthal was founded in West Germany in 1946, right after the war, by men who had profited from it. And disturbingly, its research labs became a safe haven for former Nazi scientists, including some who had conducted lethal experiments in concentration camps. This was the corporate culture that, on October 1st, 1957, launched thalidomide in Germany under the brand name Contergan, followed very quickly by Distaval in the UK. This quote, this is not an exaggeration. It's pulled directly from their marketing materials. They flooded doctors' offices and medical journals with claims that the drug was completely safe, outstandingly safe, specifically targeting pregnant women who were suffering from morning sickness. And here's the most damning part. This claim was made without a single solitary test ever being conducted on a pregnant subject. It was a complete fabrication based on a totally false assumption that the placental barrier would protect the fetus. And it gets worse. When the first red flags started to pop up, they weren't just ignored, they were actively and aggressively suppressed. As early as 1959, doctors were reporting that the drug was causing severe nerve damage, peripheral neuritis, in adult patients. But instead of investigating, Grunenthal dismissed the reports. They attacked the credibility of the doctors, they used their connections with medical journals to delay negative publications, and they even went so far as to hire private investigators to spy on physicians who were asking too many questions. At every single turn, profit was prioritized over patient safety. So while the company was busy bearing any and all warnings, a truly horrifying medical mystery was quietly unfolding in maternity wards all across the globe. You had doctors with no knowledge of each other's work who began to see a pattern of birth defects so incredibly rare that many of them had never witnessed a single case in their entire careers. Now they were seeing them cluster. The signature devastating injury of thalidomide was a condition called phocomelia, which translates to seal limbs. It's a catastrophic malformation where a baby's hands and feet are attached directly to their torso because the long bones in their arms and legs never developed. But it wasn't just the limbs. Babies were being born without ears, with severe life-altering damage to their eyes, their hearts, and their internal organs. The epidemic started not with a bang, but as this creeping horror. The very first known victim was born on Christmas Day 1956 to an employee of Chemie Grunenthal itself, a full year before the drug was even officially on the market. By 1960, what had been a trickle had become a flood. Doctors in West Germany were completely baffled, realizing they were in the middle of a terrifying epidemic with no apparent cause. This question just haunted pediatricians from Australia to Europe. What could possibly be the common threat? They wondered if it was a new virus or maybe radiation from atomic testing, a new environmental toxin. What could possibly be causing this sudden global wave of identical and absolutely devastating birth defects? The puzzle was finally solved, not by one, but by two brilliant doctors working independently half a world apart. In Germany, a pediatrician named Dr. Widukins Lenz meticulously interviewed the mothers of affected children, and he found the one common link. Every single one of them had taken Contragan early in their pregnancy. At the same time, in Australia, an obstetrician named Dr. William McBride noticed the exact same pattern at his hospital. His now famous letter to the prestigious medical journal The Lancet, published in December 1961, blew the case wide open, publicly linking the safe pill to the horrifying deformities. The detectives had found their culprit. Now, while this tragedy was exploding across 46 countries, the United States remained strangely untouched. And the reason for this wasn't luck. It was the scientific integrity and the sheer stubborn tenacity of one woman, a brand new medical officer at the Food and Drug Administration, who waged a lonely and incredibly difficult battle against immense corporate power. So, in September of 1960, the application to sell thalidomide in the United States landed on the desk of Dr. Frances Oldham Kelsey. It was one of her very first assignments. The drug company, Morel, was expecting a routine, quick approval. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. Dr. Kelsey took one look at the application and was immediately skeptical. The so-called safety data was just a collection of letters and testimonials from doctors. It wasn't a rigorous scientific study at all. She was particularly alarmed by those British reports of nerve damage in adults. Her logic was simple but brilliant. If this drug can harm the nerves of a fully developed adult, what on earth could it do to the rapidly developing nervous system of a fetus? She refused to approve it. She demanded real, hard, conclusive data. The company's response was swift and furious. They launched an intense pressure campaign against her. They called her lazy, an obstructionist, a petty, nitpicking bureaucrat. They called her bosses constantly. They sent legions of representatives to Washington, D.C. to try and go over her head. And most chillingly of all, while they were publicly trying to bully her into an approval, they were secretly distributing millions of sample or experimental tablets to doctors all across the U.S. This action alone resulted in at least 17 American thalidomide babies. But Dr. Kelsey, she would not budge. For 19 grueling months, she held the line. And then the horrifying news from Europe finally broke. And just like that, Dr. Kelsey was no longer a petty bureaucrat. She was a national hero. In 1962, President John F. Kennedy himself presented her with the highest honor available to a civilian federal employee, recognizing that her courage, her integrity, and her commitment to science had saved the United States from an unimaginable tragedy. So now we know the who, the what, and the where of this story. But let's circle back to the science for a moment to really understand the how. How exactly did this one small molecule wage such a devastating and precise war on a developing embryo? Well, the key to the drug's incredible destructive power was its timing. The damage wasn't random at all. It happened within this precise and just terrifyingly narrow, critical window of development. We're talking about the time between the 20th and 36th day after conception. Now think about that. This is a time when most women don't even know for sure that they're pregnant. And a single pill, just one 50-milligram tablet, taken on the wrong day during that window was enough to cause irreversible harm.
So what happens inside the embryo? Well, thalidomide sets off a horrifying cascade of destruction. First, it inhibits something called angiogenesis, which means it literally stops the formation of new blood vessels. This essentially starves the tiny developing limb buds of oxygen and nutrients. We now know it does this by binding directly to a key protein called cereblon. When it does that, it disrupts all these critical growth signals, including a very important protein, nicknamed sonic hedgehog, that basically acts like a tiny architect, telling the limbs how to form properly. And finally, it creates massive oxidative stress, which triggers cells in the developing limbs to simply die off. It's a multi-pronged molecular assault at the very earliest stages of life.
In the wake of such a clear and completely devastating failure of the system, the world was finally forced to confront the consequences. So, the final chapter of this story is really about the long, hard fight for justice and the revolution in drug safety that was born directly from this tragedy. The legal battles that followed were long, they were difficult, and for many of the families, they were deeply, deeply unsatisfying. In Germany, the criminal trial against the company executives was shockingly terminated after they reached a monetary settlement, with the court deciding it was not in the public interest to continue. In the UK and Australia, it took decades of relentless campaigning by families and journalists to secure any kind of meaningful compensation for the victims. For many, true justice never really felt like it was served. But the tragedy's most enduring legacy was the complete and total overhaul of drug regulation worldwide. Galvanized by Dr. Kelsey's heroism, the U.S. Congress passed the Kefauver-Harris Amendment in 1962. This was revolutionary. For the very first time, it forced companies to prove a drug was not just safe, but also effective for what they claimed it did. It mandated the phased clinical trial system, phase 1, 2, and 3, that we all rely on today. It required informed consent from all trial participants. And crucially, it made rigorous testing for birth defects in animals a non-negotiable requirement for any new drug. But please, don't think for a second that this story is confined to the past. The survivors, who are now in their 60s, are facing a whole new health crisis of chronic pain, joint degeneration, and accelerated aging from a lifetime of compensating for their disabilities. And, unbelievably, tragically, in Brazil, where thalidomide is still used to treat leprosy, poor controls and lack of warnings have led to the birth of a second generation of victims. The shadow of this drug is very, very long. So, what's the ultimate takeaway here? What do we learn from all this? Perhaps this analogy says it best. If the systems that protect us from dangerous medicines today are like a modern, sophisticated aircraft built with countless redundant safety features, then thalidomide was the catastrophic mid-air structural failure that forced engineers to go back to the drawing board and rethink every single rivet and wing spar. We fly more safely today because we learned, through an unbelievable tragedy, that a smooth takeoff never ever guarantees a safe arrival. And that is a lesson written in the lives of an entire generation.